I'm Carolyn Tomei, State Representative, and you're watching Milwaukee Today. We've been doing a series of shows about the history of Milwaukee, and we're calling these Milwaukee Yesterday. I have as my guest today Margaret Hosley Wade, to get my name straight, and Bill Hosley. Thank you again for joining us. They were with us last week, and we're going to be continuing the history of the Hosley family in Milwaukee. And we have a wonderful picture here. This is going to be picture number 24, which is a picture of the farmhouse that the Hosley family had. The Hosley family, is that correct?
Actually, the
Wade?
the Kyle
family, right. This was the farm, and it was on Railroad Avenue, right?
Yes.
That's great. That's a terrific picture. And this is number 25. This is a great picture of the Willamette River here in Milwaukee. It's hard to recognize this, but I don't think I've ever seen a picture.
No, we haven't either,
and
we've asked some questions about it, Carolyn. And it's noted on there that it's a picture of the Willamette. We've asked some people who were here in 1908 to, well, they were born in 08, and they didn't remember these buildings. So this is something we just uncovered in the last few days, so we'll actually do a little bit of research on that.
Good. And it may be that somebody watching this on television will recognize this and be able to give us some more information. That'd be great. Good. Okay, so where did we let off and where do we want to go?
We would like to show you a picture, a couple of pictures. This is a paper from the 1950.
Milwaukee Centennial.
Yeah. And it has a number of pictures, but Leonard Mullen is the son of Ike Mullen, and
we saw him last week.
Saw a picture, but inside there is a picture of the Wissinger's store, and the Wissinger's store is, as the caption goes, is facing west on Main Street, at the corner of Washington Street. And so I'm believing that right across the street is where the Wetzler building was. And the Wetzler building was built by a man named Fred Wetzler. And as one looks across to the right, there's kind of a vacant area there, and that's where we believe the mission church was, that was established in 1864. And it was the original St. John's Mission Church.
This is the Catholic Church,
This is
right?
the Catholic Church, and this is where ultimately, well, now it's Joe Bernard's garage. And when I first saw this picture, I looked at that church with the steeple, and I said to myself, that's St. Joe. Finally, we found a picture of the old mission church. But I don't think so. I think I talked to a number of people, and they seem to think that was the German Methodist Church. And the German Methodist Church is no longer there, but I believe it's roughly in the area where the Colonial White House is, which was owned by Mr. Derby, the man that had the jewelry store. And his jewelry store originally was, if this is that corner, his jewelry store was in the same block on the west side of Main Street, about in the middle, and it was either the same building that was occupied by the barber shop or just next to it, right in that area.
Right.
And that building was either the building that Barbara and Samuel originally lived here when they came in 1876, or just next to it. It was all right in the same block. The man that owned the barber shop was Everett Townsend, and he ultimately went across the street to the Wetzler building and established Everett's barber shop, and worked there for years. And his son worked there, Jim Townsend, who now has Jim's Styling Shop, or whatever you call it, up on 32nd and Harrison.
Right.
And I'm sure that if we're lucky, Jim would be happy to come down here.
Good. We'll have to bug him to do this. This is picture number 26, so we want to make sure that we mark that one.
I promised him I would mention this.
Good.
So
great.
He's real happy with me.
Good.
I'm sure. So
great.
There's a number of, I don't know if you have this.
I don't have it. That's a great picture. And this is Leonard Mullen, who was the mayor of Milwaukee at one point.
Yes.
He's picture number 27.
Yeah, and he was, he had a, I believe he owned a business or a mechanics business in town, but I'm not exactly sure about that.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Gosh, where are we back to the, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the mission church. The the Mission Church had service every other week. And the priest that would perform the service would walk from, or come in a buggy from, Sacred Heart Parish in Brooklyn. And that was actually staffed by a Benedictine priest from Mount Angel. The Mount Angel sent a priest to Sacred Heart and stay there, and he'd come every other week. They'd have this mass, the service at the Mission Church where Joe Bernard's garage is. On the opposite week, many of the people, the Kyle family, my grandmother and her sisters, and my great-grandmother Elizabeth, would go to Mass at Sacred Heart in Brooklyn. They would walk down the railroad tracks, the railroad tracks we talked about in a previous session.
Right, there along Railroad Avenue.
And the Sacred Heart Church is still there. And I took a drive to see the mileage. It's just roughly a 5-mile trek.
So that would be quite a walk along the railroad tracks.
Quite a walk, but that's what they would do on Sunday. And my grandmother was taught piano, and so she played the piano in the church service. And my great aunt Johanna had a beautiful voice. She was a beautiful soloist, and she sang. And my grandfather played the violin, and we think that that's how he met my grandmother, but we're not exactly sure about that. Maybe we're just fantasizing. But anyway, they were all together, and the mission. I think the last service was probably in the early teens, because the new St. John's Church was built up on 25th and Monroe, just right next to the convent.
Right.
Dad can remember going to Mass there when he was 3. So he remembers the Mission Church really well.
3 years old. So what about some of these other pictures here?
Well, which ones do we have? These we've seen, I think, down here.
Are we still? Oh,
Have we looked at this? What was this?
This was St. John's. Well, this was the next church after the Mission Church.
yeah,
This is a great picture. This is number 28.
this is the new church. It's gone.
The School of St. John the Baptist, Milwaukie, Oregon. First year. It's amazing. And you have some people in your family in this picture, right?
We've got Dad. He's right here.
He's the middle row on the left, next to the nun.
And I'm not sure if Sister Petronella's in there.
No, she's in here.
She must
But I
be.
don't.
Look for a bow.
I think this might be.
Yeah.
Do one of those people have glasses? I need glasses to see. We'll have to identify her. She's in there.
Right. Great. We will. Okay.
She remembered her teachers, and
Yeah, she can look at this and she remembers who the nuns were and who the priests.
That would be fun to have her on sometime and have her talk about the folks in this picture. This is number 28. Okay. Now where are we?
we are. Well, we're in that era. Would it be fun to tell about the story about when they went to the park and took the ferns?
This is number 29.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, that's a great story.
You tell the story.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. This is a picture of Sister Petronella, and this is my father.
He's the little guy in the front with the hat.
My father's the little one with the hat and what looks to be a ballet shoes and a dress.
That was very common in those days, sure.
That's what he's wearing. And this, let's see. This is Elizabeth, and her mommy is Louise, and she was married to Anton Kyle. He's one of the brothers of the Farm brothers. And these two women are sisters. I think this is Mary, and that's Johanna, isn't it? Mm-hmm. In any case, they went for an outing up to Washington Park, and they were photographed that day. And into the park they went, and they saw some ferns that they thought would look great at the farm, and so they dug the ferns up and took them back. And when they got into their little buggy or however they were transported, they were stopped by the local policeman who said, "You can't take that." And he said, "You have to come down to the police headquarters because you're arrested."
So they went to jail.
Well, they didn't go to jail. He got them. They all got on the streetcar, and he started to go downtown with them. And got downtown, and they were panic-stricken. They were in fear for their life, So rather than go through all the motions, I think he was just trying to scare us.
Right.
He said,
That's a
"No,
great story
Don't you do that anymore."
for digging. That's number 29. Great. Okay.
So what do we have?
What are some of these
we've all
pictures?
gone through here.
Oh, I was going to. Should we just get rid of the buggy picture here? The last of the farm pictures?
Sure.
Do you want to do this in
Sure.
order?
This is number 30.
In the earlier session, we talked about my grandfather and my dad going to get firewood. And this was the buggy that they took down to the mill.
So this was all the children in the buggy.
Yes.
Right. That's number 30.
And I'd have to put a
30.
magnifying glass on to identify
Right.
them all. And I don't know if that's all that important, but this just happens to be. This is just a family photo, as is family photo, people on the farm.
Okay. That's number 32.
I think
1913. That's a great picture on the bicycle.
I'm not sure if we have looked at this picture, Carolyn.
Oh, I don't think we have. So this is number 32. This is also the farm. Right?
This is looking up Monroe Street.
Oh, Monroe.
From
That's
Milton.
right. This is number 33, Monroe Street.
From what looks to be 20. What would be 21st and Monroe? Looking east
Right.
from roughly 21st and Monroe.
Looking east. Wow, that's amazing.
And I'm not sure. This looks to be maybe the convent at St. John's, but I'm not certain about that. And there were some other. I need help from my father to identify some of those buildings. But there was a doctor who lived in that area. Henry Albers lived someplace up there. I'm not exactly sure. Henry Albers had
the mill, right?
the mill in downtown
Great.
Portland, and there was a picture with a band. And there were 4 or 5 names. My grandfather was in there. The Derwees were in there. Al Gauger, I mentioned that.
Right.
There was another man named Joe Dahlman. And Joe Dahlman had come from Germany. And as soon as he arrived at Milwaukee, he went to work for Henry Albers. Henry Albers was a German. And that's how that's probably why Dahlman came to Milwaukee. And actually, Henry Albers was on a streetcar. And sometime during the war, and he made a disparaging remark about Americans, or he somehow praised Germans. And I think that, as the story goes, he spent the rest of his life or a lot of his fortune defending himself because the government kind of convened on him. And
Amazing. Okay, what about some of these other pictures?
Do you have the original picture of? Well, you saw a picture of great-grandfather Samuel and Barbara.
Right.
And it's in your exhibits from the first session. And there's a picture of an old house in the background, and that house was on the family farm. They had moved from Main Street in Milwaukee, and they bought 5 or 6 acres between Lake Road and Kellogg Creek, and that's where that farmhouse was. And next to that farmhouse was a large prune dryer, and it became either inoperative or they didn't dry prunes anymore, but they decided to dismantle it. And after they dismantled it, they kept some of the lumber. And I have in my hand a picture of a house on Lake Road.
Oh, sure.
And that's part of that prune dryer.
And that house is
that's
still
still
there,
there.
right?
Still there, and they took some of the lumber from the prune dryer was used to build this house.
That's number 33.
And that was, and
That's
that house
great.
that craftsman style home was built someplace in I would say the mid-20s.
Right.
Roughly
That's that
that
era.
era.
That's
Near
great.
28th Street.
Yeah.
Okay. How about that one?
Okay, this is, excuse me, this is a picture of Main Street and Monroe. And the picture is identified now as Hosley Brothers Furniture.
Oh, yes.
But prior to that, it was a dry goods store that was owned by my grandmother. And in the back, there was a little radio shop that my father operated. Prior to that, it was owned by Dahlman and Johnson. This German man, Dahlman, and another man had a feed and seed there at a mercantile store. And when the Depression came, they were unable to make a go of it, so they let it go. And my grandmother operated this dry goods store. She was a successor to Dahlman and Johnson. I'm assuming she just went right into it, but there could have been a lag. I'm not sure about the chronology. Then, my father rented a little portion of it and repaired radios. He had a background in electricity, and in fact, he was during the Depression. He worked for the Philadelphia Electrical Company, and they had a store right down downtown Portland, on the southwest side. Actually, it would be northwest, because I believe the demarcation line is Burnside, and it's just north of that, in a building that housed Captain's Nautical Supplies. If you remember that little building.
do.
I used to be Philadelphia Electric, and my father, during the Depression, had a number of people that worked for him, and their responsibility was to accept all the radio equipment that came from Philadelphia Electric, and they would make sure it all ran properly, and then it was a distribution site. When he was completed that work, he opened up this little shop in my grandmother's dry goods store on the corner of Main Street in Monroe.
So that preceded Hosley
The other
Furniture, right?
Yes. Yes.
So let's get to Hosley Furniture. We have some pictures of that, right? Because everybody talks about that.
Well,
Who talks about the history of Milwaukee.
During towards the end of the war, there was a fire in that building. And if you'll notice in that block from that picture, there appears to be, I took a magnifying glass, I think there's a beauty shop right here, and this is a hardware store. It says Marshall and Wells Hardware Store, I think, but
And this is still on number 34.
Yes.
Okay.
In about 1945?
It was 1945.
There was a fire at the store, and it wasn't completely a loss, but it was 99%. Margie, tell the story about the water on the safe.
Well, when Dad, who was living on 28th Street at the time, found out what was going on, he went over there, and I think he spent a good portion of the night running his hose on the safe so that the contents, wouldn't be ruined.
Right. And the
While
safe
they
would
were-
contain money, right? Probably.
Well, I don't know what I'm sure it had documents and
Right.
and
Probably, I think that they're
records
probably more worried about the records.
I think
yeah.
so.
And
So he did that throughout, I think, most of the night, and they lost it. I mean, the building was lost entirely, so they had to move to a temporary location. Which, if you go right down the street to the corner of the Milwaukie Junior High field, there was a vacant building there, and they moved into that temporarily until they were able to find another piece of property and rebuild. So I think they were there for maybe a year, probably anyway.
Okay, and so then where did they go?
well, they were in the same block, but there was a portion of that block that was owned by a man named Lehman, and he was unwilling to sell it to anybody. And for some reason, after this occurred, he agreed to sell my father the property on the north side of the block. So that's where they built the building. But
Now this is on Main Street, and between what streets?
This is where Key Bank would be right now.
Okay, so that's a Monroe, and then the northern street what is that, Jackson?
Is it Jackson that goes between City Hall and...
I can't remember, I
And,
think it is. Okay, but anyway, it's north of Monroe. It goes north from Monroe.
It's Jackson. It's Jackson. In order to first of all, the building was demolished. It was gone. But prior to, well, in order to do this, there was another little building in here that had the beauty shop, and they had to move that. And I just found out today from my sister Margaret that it went to
42nd Jefferson, or thereabouts. They moved it up there.
Ah,
Kept it
okay.
intact.
Okay.
So it continued to...
And then this center building had to be left there because I remember going into that building, and I was born in 1949. That would have been 4 years. I remember going into Ed Norbeck's hardware store, and this was after the new store was there. So they left that building, and either on the top of the hardware store or on the top of the old furniture store. Prior to when my family took it over, this Dominic Johnson store that was there had a quarters, living quarters, and Johnson lived in this living quarters, and he had some sort of signaling mechanism between this Johnson and the bank right across the street, First State Bank, and if the bank signaled him, that meant the bad guys were robbing him, and he had a shotgun. They had this little program where he was going to come over and make sure nothing bad happened.
Oh, that's funny. That's number 35. Okay, great.
Then after the fire, I'm not sure when First State built the First State went and built a bank there, and ultimately through mergers it became what is now Key Bank.
Right. So where did Hosley's open up?
Well, just on the north end of this block.
Okay, all right, I see. What is now
Which is still there.
And it's still there, and it was Hamilton's,
Right.
and now it's owned by Dark Horse Comics.
Exactly.
We have about 3 minutes.
Okay. Here, this is just some construction pictures.
Okay, this is
And they were
36.
rebuilding.
Okay.
And this gentleman that you're seeing in here, the distinguished gray-haired gentleman in the suit, is Mr. Lou Woltering.
Okay,
And-
number 37.
And he was, this is my, and the other person is my father.
Ah. So your father's the fellow with the glasses?
Yes.
Okay, so that's 37 and 38, okay. Okay, we have about 2 minutes.
This just is construction pictures. Actually, it's really noteworthy to say, to bring up the name of the store. It was originally Hosley Brothers Furniture, and it was actually owned by my father. At some point in time, I think probably when they did the new building or someplace close there, Joe went on his own, and he had a Maytag.
Oh, appliance, right,
concern
right.
Right on
Yeah,
the corner of
right.
Park and McLaughlin.
Right.
And served virtually hundreds of people. You know, people to this day remember doing business with Uncle Joe.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and he relied on him for their repair work.
We have about 1 minute left. Anything that we haven't covered yet?
Oh, gosh. What do you have here? I don't... we could get into some other things here. I can show you some pictures that you can introduce into your files. This was some of your viewers will remember Lee Kronberg. I believe Lee Kronberg's real estate office was right about where my grandfather's shoe store was. That's where he fell over and died of the heart attack.
Right. Great.
So that was all in this block, and I should maybe point out when the construction was being done on the furniture store, I remember my father telling me that they couldn't get metal because so much of the steel went into the Liberty ships.
Right.
So on the weekends he would go trekking around to little communities, John Day and Baker and all these little cities, going to the hardware stores getting nails.
Oh, that's amazing.
And that was.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's just been a fascinating history. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Carolyn Tomei, State Representative, and you're watching Milwaukee Today. This is one in a series of shows about the history of Milwaukee, and we're calling them Milwaukee Yesterday. I've had as my guest Margaret Hosley Wade and Bill Hosley, who have joined us today to talk about their history in Milwaukee, which goes back to the 1800s. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.